Even though you drive like a little old lady, even I can tell there's something not quite right in the Tahoe here.
Yeah, you know, it's weird. Progressively, it's gotten worse, Brian, and worse and worse and worse, kind of bouncing a little bit all over. Feels like it's jacked all the way up.
Yeah, something's not right.
No, there's no codes, no check engine light. I mean, there's something going on here. You know what we need to do? We actually need to check this thing out today on Tech Garage, and we'll bring you along for the ride. Well, we got our 2015 Tahoe in the shop, and it's bouncing like a baby buggy. Welcome to Tech Garage, presented by rockauto.com. Well, Brian, we went ahead and put the fronts on. I know you did a great job with that. Took it out on a test drive. What did you find?
You know, it felt really good. Liked how it drove down the road. Big improvement, over 100,000 miles on this thing. But the rear, with the jounce test, said, I still want to be replaced. So we got to get those rears swapped out too.
Yeah, you know, before you do that, this is a magneto-rheological, even though I could say that word.
That's a lot of syllables.
Ride. We'll call it Magnaride from now on out. But your fronts, you got a couple demos there. Tell us about the fronts. Not so easy to do.
Yeah, it wasn't so easy to do. There's a tremendous amount of technology at every corner of this vehicle, air, magnetics, all that. There's a wiring harness up here. We had to wrestle our way through that, but we got it out and got it replaced. I feel really good about that. The one question I have before you get into all this technology today is, why would you bring your makeup to the table?
Yeah, that's very expensive makeup, man. That's the MR fluid. We'll get that in a minute, but I'll tell you what, you get to work on the rear shocks, and I'll actually show you how the system works. And that's what I said. It's a magno-rheological ride. GM calls it Magnaride. You probably heard it before. How does it work? That's the magic of it all. You can see I have it laid out here on the table. And let's go ahead and start with the front shocks. Now, our front shocks, they're electrically driven. So I have a little electrical connector right here with two terminals that has to get pushed up and plugged in. Well, once that's plugged in, you have a computer right here that's sensing it, and we'll look at that in a minute. Now, on the rears, I actually have air shocks right here. These are air shocks, and they're driven by this air pump that's in the rear of the system. So as the air pump starts to drive it, it's going to lift it up or down as it goes. Now, how does it work? Well, you have these sensors right here. You actually have a front sensor. Now, the front sensor rides up and down, and it tells the height of the vehicle. If it starts to go really fast, well, it knows it can do with the shocks I'm going to show you here in a second. The rear one's located right here. Once again, I want to know the height in the rear when I'm hitting bumps. What's going on? Well, what's going on? Over 1,000 times per second. So I'm talking about milliseconds of action. That computer is going to go ahead, and it's either going to energize these or it's going to energize the air pump. Either way, we're going to get it under control. Now, let me show you the beauty and the magic of this system. Let's go back to the basics of shock absorbers. You know, we started out with the monotube shock absorber right here. It was just a single tube right here, and the single tube would allow the fluid to go past this little valving, and the valving determined how it bounced. These things control spring oscillations. Now, here's another one right here. This is a gas shock. Now, what makes it a gas shock? Well, there's a gas chamber right here. This gas chamber holds pressure on the liquid so you don't get any aeration in the system when it's going really fast. Now, speaking of going really fast, let's look at our Magnaride system, our magno-rheological ride. This is pretty cool because I got it right here. This is the one that Brian took off the front of the car. You can see it leaked out all the fluid. Well, he asked about my makeup a little bit earlier. That big old blob is what was left in there. Once all the oil was out, that's all there was. There's supposed to be fluid in there. Now, look inside of here. This is pretty cool. You got the wires feeding down to these magnets in here. What do? Well, we energize it or de-energize it. We energize it, we make the fluid real thick, real viscous. It's harder to go through these chambers, and it makes the ride very stiff. Once again, if I take it and I take the magnetism away from it, well, the fluid's going to become real thin, and it's easy to flow through so you can get more of a bounce in the vehicle. Now, what's in there? It's called MR fluid. This is the coolest ever. I have some right here. We have some MR fluid. Brian called it my makeup. Now, man, this is neat. So you can see it right here. This is about the viscosity of it. So what happens is right now it would be flowing through there. It would flow through real easily, and it would be very bouncy. Now, if we want to stiffen it up, I have a magnet on a speaker right here. So I take it and I put it down on the magnet. Watch this. All of a sudden, man, you get this thick viscosity. I mean, that joker will hold up the spoon right there. Now, check this out. As soon as you take the fluid off, voila, turns into a thinner fluid. So I pick it up, bam. So if I had it up in the air like this and it was flowing, well, you got a nice spongy ride. Down here where it's thick, it's going to thicken it up. does it in 1,000 times per second, mind you. It's watching that thing bounce. Well, speaking of bouncing, our 2015 Tahoe is going to need some attention on the rears. Brian's underway. We'll check in with him right after this break. There's plenty more Tech Garage to come at you, brought to you by rockauto.com.
Tech Garage, presented by rockauto.com, is brought to you by Borla, the world's most winning exhaust. Custom Auto Sound, the originator of classic car OEM fit radio since 1977. And by rockauto.com, all the parts your car will ever need.
Well, welcome back to Tech Garage, presented by rockauto.com. There we go. We got the nut on the top mounting bolt of this shock. Now, let's slow down so we can speed up the repair. We've got the new shock hung because that's as easy as it's ever been. But a really good tip, just good practice for you, anytime you get a chance to get a vehicle this large with this large of wheels and tires and a good look at what's going on underneath here, you should. A basic visual inspection. I've looked at the brakes, the caliper, the brake line. The pads look good. There's plenty of life left. No cuts on the rotor. Why am I looking at that? Just because I'm here. Now the shock repair itself, as simple as it's ever been. Top bolt, bottom bolt. But this is not your grandfather's air shock anymore. You've got the inbound nipple where the air line sits on it. I'm going to show you how to clip that in a second. And of course, we've got circuitry here. Remember, John talked about 1,000 adjustments per second. This is a Magnaride system with air ride at the back. So we've got to have that full control. I'll show you the ride height sensor in just a second. Also, before you pull the old shock out, do a shake test. Check it in the mount. See if anything's rattling. What's the condition of these bushings? Is any of that worn out? Are there any fluids leaking? Has this shock broken anywhere? This one looks pretty good, but we know we've taken it for rides twice now and it's not driving properly. So we got to replace these guys. So very simple with the top hung in there. Now here's another little tip for you. In the driveway, on jack stands or on a lift, we've all struggled with getting this mounting position just right. Use a jack, any kind of a small bottle jack or floor jack. Get this lined up so you don't need a drift pin, you don't need to smash your pinky, and this mounting bolt goes right back in. Get it in here, secure, there we go. The jack is your friend. All right, here's the ride height sensor John was talking about. You saw these lying on the table. This again, you think about it. There's a reading coming from here. It knows where the home position is. So as the suspension travels, it's reporting. Making an adjustment through the air compressor into the top of that shock. There's your full travel, the full circuit of keeping this vehicle stable in pretty much all conditions. So we'll reconnect the air line right here. It slides down on, you'll feel it, and then there's a clip. You may have to wrestle with this clip just a little bit. You can get a good look at it right here. It just spreads and then goes down over. Get my glasses up in, wrestle this guy a little bit. Be sure it seats down over. There we go. Try pulling that line off. It's not coming. I'm good. The sensor up here is reconnected. A little bit tricky up there to reach it. Get that in. I'm going to get these mounting bolts torqued up properly, top and bottom. I'll torque them a second time. Final visual inspection and we're good. So here's the good news. On the LS lesson, that beast of a project's coming together, and today we're playing with pistons. So stay with us on Tech Garage, presented by rockauto.com.
LS lesson time. Welcome back to Tech Garage, presented by rockauto.com. Boy, I'll tell you what, we got it measured on the lower end. Time to turn our attention to the pistons and maybe even the crankshaft bore, Brian.
I'll tell you what, the piston's got a big, big job. We all know that. But there's a lot of technology even in these guys as well.
I'll tell you what, we got them all cleaned up. You know, the rings, the old rings, made it matter just kind of peeling them off. We just kind of work them around and get them off of there for you. I'm going to hold on to that. Well, I actually got the new ones over there. So there's a top ring. There's 3 rings. That's great. I'll use that for a scraper. You want to bust them. That's great. Tell us a little bit about the rings.
Absolutely. Big job with the rings, right? You've got compression rings, and then you've got this guy, the oil ring. And I'll tell you what, this is a really good moment for a quick sermon on oil rings. We talk all the time about keeping your oil fresh, the right oil in your vehicle. You want to give this oil ring every chance you possibly can to be successful at every piston. When you take that times 8 with the wrong oil or old oil or burnt oil, that actually can't do its job and keep that piston cool and lubricated. So it's a little thing that means the world.
That's the truth. Now you got your rings off. You're going to have some carbon buildup. You can go get you a fancy tool like this. Basically just goes in the ring gap right here. And when it goes inside of the ring gap, you can put it in there. And then what you're going to do is just kind of drive it around inside of the ring gap. And that's going to go ahead and cut the ring, go all the way around, get the carbon out. But Brian, we're all about old school, man. You remember when I pulled that ring out? That was nice. It broke. Guess what?
Absolutely.
I got me a ring cleaner, man.
You know, the thing that's interesting
Put it in there, run it around, clean all the carbon out of there. Use an old broken ring, works great.
Absolutely. Let's check the land. We can also put a ring in there and check the new land, and we've got 15 thousandths here, and we can just check this and see if we're within spec.
Absolutely huge. We want that clearance. So I'm going to stick a ring in there like that backwards.
Right in here.
Yep.
Get it down in. Let's check it.
There you go.
We're good. You can roll.
Go no-go gauge right there.
No-go, you're
wonderful.
good. Yep.
You know, if that was too tight, it's going to stick in there. It's not going to work. You're going to get blow-by in the engine. It's not going to expand. That's a huge job.
It's a big deal.
All right. We also want to check ring end gap. This is pretty cool. I can take the ring right here. This is huge. I'm going to put it in the cylinder. I mean, there's a bunch of measurements you can make. We're just going to show you a couple of them. Take the piston while the ring's off. Kind of square it up in the cylinder a little bit, a little ways down. And then I'm going to come back and take my feeler gauge set. When I got my feeler gauge set there, I want to go right into the end gap of the ring, and I want to check it. I want to make sure that everything's all right, if I have enough clearance. Well, what's the clearance? Well, take a look at the graphic, man. Once again, go to the service manual. There's 1,000 different specifications for these jokers. If it wasn't right, take it. They have a ring cool, fancy ring filers, man, and file that joker. We can come back here and just hit it a couple times. Make sure it's right. Make sure it's going to go in there. I mean, that's huge.
In there.
Once again, too big of a gap, blow by, not enough gap, binding, it's not going to open, it's going to have a problem.
Absolutely. I'll tell you what, let's roll this thing around to the bottom end, the business end of this thing, and we'll see how the other end goes.
Yeah, I mean, a couple other measurements before we do that real quick. We put the piston in, we're going to measure the piston, make sure it's clearance. Remember we did the block last week? Want to make sure that's not going to be too tight, that's going to bind up. And then when we install the rings, super important that we install them right. Inside of the rings, there's different markings. There's top markings, bottom markings, dots. You want to put on our ones, we're going to put the bottom one down with the dot up and the top one up there with no ring at all, no dot. And the up position, that's huge.
Really,
so you want to
really
make sure you follow that, Brian. We need to head to the bottom of this joker.
All right, the business end, come on around. There we go.
Nice,
like
nice, yep.
Get it level here for us. There we
Here we go.
All right, you want to talk main bearings for just a minute?
Absolutely.
Okay, so this is critical. Obviously, ×8, ×4, whatever you're working on. But first things first, when you get the new bearings, obviously you want to make sure all your surfaces are perfectly clean, and they only go in one way. A lot of people mess this up. You want to see the holes right here? They've got to line up. These are your oil passages. And this is going to sit down in and see the indentation right here. That's got to line up as well. If it doesn't, don't force it. You got the wrong one. All right, we're in place there.
Perfect. Now, when it comes to bearings, they're very, very thin. The metal is tin. You got embeddability, so stuff can get in there. You have what's called crush. When you put them in, it's going to smooch each other. And you have what's called spread. When you put it in there, it's kind of tight to put it in there. Brian just mentioned that. Look at this tab's going to be on that side. That's on this side. If it's not, they're going to spin. That's going to how it locks the bearing in there. So I'll put mine in there as well. And Brian, we can go ahead and put it on there. We'll just kind of do a dry fit. Give us a basic understanding of what the crankshaft size is going to be in our bearing clearance.
Yeah.
So get it started. You got a couple bolts over there?
Absolutely, on the stud on the outside.
Yep, that's our drip pan, our oil.
That's it. And we're not going to torque these down to spec. We just kind of want to show you how you're going to take a measurement. Again, you'll do this on both ends. So if we torque this down,
tap it down a little bit just to give an idea. I mean,
seated, you take your telescoping gauge, you take a reading right here.
All right, so I do that. Come in here. I want to be careful with the bearing.
Yep.
And I come in here and pop that joker open like that. Whoop, I missed.
Capture it, strike two.
All right, let's do this in here.
There you go, buddy.
Look at that. All right.
All right.
Now I can do that. I can do it perpendicular. I can go side to side. I can do taper, all kinds of stuff.
Yep.
Come back, take a micrometer, and I'm going to read that. Now that's not telling me a whole lot, but it's giving me the number there.
Gives you something to work with.
Important, I have to come over to the crankshaft now.
Yep.
So we come over to the crankshaft and we measure that same journal on the crankshaft, the main journal. I'm going to measure it this way, and then in and out for taper. And what I want to do is take that and subtract it from there, and then we can tell exactly what the bearing clearance is. That's important.
Yep, get a napkin, piece of paper, whatever it is, do the math. You got to see that delta. Make sure you're within spec. It's critical.
Absolutely. Now, you know, we're going to torque it to specification. Don't get all upset with us. We're going to do some angle gauge torquing, and we're also going to show you plastic gauge, but you're going to have to wait till next week. We'll have this guy lined up and ready to go. All right, we'll do it right. So stick with us. Hey, we got some Garage Ed coming up in a minute. More Tech Garage. We'll be back. Presented by rockauto.com.
Tech Garage, presented by RockAuto.com, is brought to you by Redline Detection, the world's best-selling diagnostic leak detector. Steel Rubber Products, quality crafted rubber parts and weather stripping. And by RockAuto.com, all the parts your car will ever need.
Well, welcome back to Tech Garage, brought to you by RockAuto.com. One of our favorite segments, Garage Ed, which means we get to wear these cool lab coats and scan for codes. We got a P0335 here, which is a crankshaft position sensor code. So I got to dig in and figure out exactly what's going on while John shows you how this whole system really works.
That's right, Brian. Things are starting to crank up around here. You get it? Oh, never mind. We're talking about crank sensors. There's a couple types of crank sensors, and we're going to look at all three of them. We're going to start here with an actual digital one that's a Hall effect switch. Now, how does a Hall effect switch work? Well, I got one right here on a board for you guys to see at home. This thing down here is the crank sensor. Now, the crank sensor picks up these little teeth as it goes around on the crank and actually interrupts with the little slit right here as it goes through there, and it turns on and off a DC voltage. Matter of fact, I can show it to you in action. If I fire this thing up down here, you look at our oscilloscope, this is actually a pattern, on, off, on, off. The faster I go, the faster and tighter the frequency gets. Well, what does that mean? Well, the computer looks at that and determines where the crankshaft is, also determines where to start the car. Now over here on our other one, I'll fire up our other oscilloscope here so you can actually look at an AC signal. Now an AC signal is a little bit different. It's a magnetic pickup. It's located right down here, and there's a tooth ring that goes around. So with AC, if I fire up this one, you can actually see the oscilloscope right there, and I'm going positive, negative, positive, negative, positive, negative. Just two types of sensors, different ways to measure them, but this one's pretty cool because this one has an air gap, a predetermined air gap. Now watch this. If I just barely touch the sensor and I move it back, boy, I'm just barely touching that thing. That's amazing. Spark goes away because of that magnetic field down there is becoming too weak for the computer to pick up. That's how you diagnose a no-start condition. Now you guys remember this old guy here, LT1, pretty cool. You got this pickup that went into the actual camshaft that driven on the front of the motor. The old LT1, this is actually a light emitting diode. It spins around, it does the same thing. Crank position sensors. Tip for you, cam sensor goes out, probably go into backup mode and run just fine. Crank goes out, you got a no start. That's why Brian's checking out the M45 right now.
That's right. Well, what we've got here is a sometimes I'll start, sometimes I won't, and if I do, I won't run long condition. So we're going to move on to some diagnostics with the crankshaft position sensor. Now, a couple driveway tips for you. There's a couple ways to do this. If you don't have a buddy to help you out, you might want to get a scan code reader that has Bluetooth connectivity to an iPhone or any kind of phone or tablet so you can monitor the data as you try to start the vehicle. More about that in a second. For the sake of TV, we're using the fancy Genesis scan tool so you can see the data. Now, this sensor is really hard to get to. That's why we're doing this type of test. We're looking for any signature at all related to RPM. That means that crankshaft position sensor is doing its job. So Chief Tech Josh, go ahead, let's see if it'll turn over. There you go, 150, 163, all right, stop. Let's do it one more time so you guys can see this. Watch the RPM. Very good, thank you. The crankshaft position sensor is working, it's doing its job, but the vehicle won't start. Something's intermittent. So our next stop along the way is to go check the wiring harness to see if we have a short somewhere. So diagnostics you can do in the driveway, get the right tool, take your time, get a buddy if you need it. John and Tom have even more tech tips to make this job easier.
Tom, we saw the DC signal, the AC signal, man. Woo, all this fancy technology going on. Bottom line, they've been using this stuff for years.
Right. Yeah, we've been hearing since we were kids that, hey, these 1970s cars, they're too modern to work on. The 80s cars are too modern. Sensors for measuring positions of things have been around forever. Here's a sensor that measures the position of the distributor as it rotates. And similar sensor is now on a newer car measuring the position of the memory seat as it goes back to its position that you've programmed into it.
Now the first sensor, what year, make, and model was that?
That was an '86 Mustang, and this newer one is a 2010 Ford Explorer, I believe. So
it's all about that magnetism.
Right, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, we saw that with the two different sensors. So you offer those parts. How far do you go back?
We go back before World War II.
Wow.
So
Awesome. So we can get the old parts, the new parts. Don't be afraid of the technology. Just get on Rock Auto. They got all the parts you ever need at great prices. That's phenomenal. Let's check in with Brian and finish things up for today.
Hey, this is the most important part of the repair right here. Just kidding. I tell you what, we got it all put back together, replaced the shock on the other side, wheels are back on, everything's torqued to spec. Really wasn't that hard to do. Now it's time for the final verification of repair test.
Well, I'll tell you what, a test. This is called a jounce test. Brian, this will tell you, I know you're good, but let's see what it does. Put my knee on here, push it up and down. Man, nothing. It's not supposed to rebound more than 1.5. This one's fixed right.
I'll tell you what, it should be a game changer. You think from front to back, that Magnaride technology was so cool.
Yeah, it is. It's going to ride like a new car, man. Our LS build, the pistons, man, that was awesome.
Coming together.
Got in the garage, Ed. We're on the output side now. This is pretty cool. It's all downhill from there. Talking about an EGR sensor. You know, we're out of time for today, though. But stay with us for next week. There'll be more Tech Garage presented by rockauto.com.
Production assistance for Tech Garage is provided by Chipola College, located in Marianna, Florida. Founded in 1947, Chipola was ranked recently as one of the top 3 community colleges in the United States.